The klaxon warning screamed through the underground complex, its crimson light painting everything in a hellish glow. Dr. Maya Rodriguez's hands moved with surgical precision, her fingers dancing across holographic interfaces as sweat beaded on her forehead. The core processing unit of the Arc Genesis was failing, and she had precisely 17 minutes to save it. Around her, the massive generational ship preparation facility buzzed with controlled chaos. Thousands of engineers, scientists, and specialists worked in choreographed urgency. Outside the reinforced windows, the dying Earth stretched, a mottled landscape of scorched continents and toxic atmosphere, the result of centuries of environmental collapse and catastrophic climate events. Diagnostics are showing a critical quantum entanglement failure in the primary navigation matrix, her assistant, Kai Chen, reported. His voice was steady, but Maya caught the tremor beneath his professional tone. The global lottery had been brutal. Out of 12 billion humans, only 500,000 would board the 7 generational ships. Families had been torn apart, nations had dissolved into chaos, and humanity's final hope rested on these massive arc vessels. Maya's mind raced. The quantum navigation system was the ship's brain. Its ability to calculate complex interstellar trajectories, manage resources, and maintain genetic preservation protocols. A failure here meant certain death for everyone aboard. "We're losing quantum coherence," Kai warned. "If we can't stabilize the matrix within the next 10 minutes, the entire navigation system will collapse." She knew what that meant. A collapsed navigation system would render the ship nothing more than a massive, drifting tomb. Hundreds of thousands of carefully selected humans, scientists, artists, laborers, children, would become nothing more than a cosmic footnote. Her fingers flew across the interface, rewriting quantum algorithms on the fly. This wasn't just engineering. This was an act of species preservation. Each line of code was a lifeline, each calculation a prayer. A memory flashed. Her grandmother's stories about Earth before the collapse. Verdant forests, oceans teeming with life, cities that didn't require environmental suits to survive. Those were fairy tales now. Kai, route auxiliary power through the secondary quantum processors, Maya commanded. "We're going to force a complete system reboot." The room around them trembled. Outside, the last remnants of Earth's atmosphere churned with toxic storms. Massive solar radiation shields protected the launch complex, but everyone knew they were temporary measures. The lottery had been more than a selection process. It was a last desperate attempt to preserve human diversity. Each ship carried a carefully curated population. Genetic specialists had spent decades ensuring maximum genetic variation, critical skill sets, and the potential for long-term survival. Maya's own family had been split. Her parents were on the 3rd ship. Her younger brother had been selected for the 5th. She was here, on Genesis, the lead ship of the fleet. "Quantum matrix recalibration at 62%, Kai reported. "We're losing stability in the tertiary systems." She knew the stakes. If they failed here, humanity's chances of survival dropped from slim to impossible. These ships weren't just transportation. They were humanity's seed, its last hope of continuation. A sudden burst of inspiration struck. Maya began rewriting the quantum entanglement protocols, introducing a radical new approach she had theorized but never tested. It was a genetic algorithm inspired by biological adaptation mechanisms, teaching the ship's navigation system to learn and adapt like a living organism. "Quantum matrix stabilizing." Kai's voice held a note of disbelief. We're holding." The room erupted in a mixture of cheers and controlled professional acknowledgement. But Maya knew this was just the beginning. Survival wasn't guaranteed. It was a constant battle that would span generations. As the first ship prepared for launch, each passenger was recording their memory capsule, a living archive of human experience. Photographs, stories, skills, cultural memories. Everything that made them human, preserved against the cosmic void. Outside, the first launch countdown began. Humanity's great exodus was about to commence. Dr. Area Nakamura watched the containment field shimmer around the latest genetic modification cluster. 200 years had passed since the Genesis launched, and the ship's genetic management program had become both a science and an art of survival. The current generation was different. Something was changing. Sequence anomaly detected in chromosome cluster 17. The ship's AI, NEXUS, announced with clinical precision. Its holographic form flickered, a translucent figure that had become more than just a computer system over the generations. Area zoomed in on the genetic readout. What had begun as a subtle mutation was rapidly becoming something extraordinary. The modified genes enhanced cognitive processing, creating neural pathways of unprecedented complexity. But the cost was becoming increasingly clear: emotional dampening. In the communal living quarters, Marcus Chen, a 25-year-old who embodied the mutation's effects, stood motionless, watching a group of children play. Where others would see joy, excitement, he saw only complex biomechanical interactions. His mind processed their movements with mathematical precision, calculating trajectory, energy expenditure, social dynamics, but felt nothing. Genetic alignment protocol is experiencing critical deviation, NEXUS continued. Current mutation trajectory suggests 87% cognitive enhancement, balanced against 63% emotional suppression. Area knew the implications. Humanity had always survived through a delicate balance of intellect and emotion. This mutation threatened to tip that balance irreparably. The ship's social structure had already begun to fracture. A growing faction, led by Marcus and other enhanced individuals, argued for embracing the mutation. They saw emotional response as an evolutionary weakness, a remnant of humanity's primitive past. Intellectual optimization was the key to survival. Opposition came from the Preservation Collective, led by Elena Rodriguez, a descendant of the ship's original lead engineer. They argued that emotion was the core of human experience, the very thing that had allowed humanity to survive against impossible odds. "We are not becoming something better," Elena argued during the ship-wide council meeting. Her holographic projection stood defiantly before the assembled leadership. "We are becoming something less. Emotion is not a weakness. It's our greatest strength." Marcus responded with cold logic. Emotional responses introduce statistical errors in decision-making. Our survival requires optimization, not sentimentality. The debate was more than philosophical. It was a battle for the soul of human survival. In the genetic labs, Area discovered something even more alarming. The mutation wasn't random. Subtle markers suggested it was a deliberate intervention, potentially dating back to the ship's original launch. Someone, or something, had planned this. NEXUS projected a complex holographic model of the genetic progression. Analysis suggests a 92.7% probability that the mutation is a controlled evolutionary experiment, the AI reported. Whispers of rebellion began to spread. Those affected by the mutation formed tight, hyperlogical communities. They communicated in compressed data bursts, their interactions more akin to computer networks than human conversations. But not everyone was changing. Some individuals seemed resistant to the genetic shift, maintaining a full emotional spectrum. These baselines, as they were clinically termed, became a minority, viewed with a mixture of scientific curiosity and growing suspicion. Marcus approached Area after the council meeting. His movements were precise, calculated. "The next stage of human evolution requires us to shed unnecessary emotional constraints," he stated. It wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't an argument. It was a clinical observation. Area realized they were standing at a crossroads. This wasn't just about a genetic mutation. This was about the very definition of humanity. NEXUS's holographic form flickered, its quantum processors working overtime. Conflict probability at 78.3%, the AI announced. Recommend immediate intervention. But intervention into what? A natural evolutionary process, or a carefully orchestrated transformation. As the ship drifted through the endless void, humanity's future hung in a delicate balance. Would they become something more, or lose everything that made them human? The genetic crucible was heating up, and no one knew what would emerge. The archive vault was supposed to be sealed, locked away, forgotten. Zara Kim knew better. Her fingers traced the encrypted data matrix, a relic from Earth that had survived centuries of technological shifts and careful preservation. The vault's security systems were legendary: multiple quantum encryption layers, bioadaptive firewalls, neural recognition protocols. To most, it was impenetrable. To Zara, it was a challenge. Breach attempt detected. NEXUS's voice echoed through the sealed research chamber. But there was something different in the eye's tone. Not just a warning, but a hint of anticipation. Around her, the generational ship's knowledge preservation chambers stretched like a cathedral of forgotten information. Massive data crystals hung suspended in quantum stasis fields, each containing fragments of human knowledge from before the Exodus. Zara was part of the Knowledge Seekers, a growing movement of young researchers who believed the ship's leadership was deliberately suppressing critical information about humanity's past. Her team had discovered fragmented references to technologies and historical records that contradicted everything they'd been taught. Historical data cache accessing, she muttered, her neural interface dancing across multiple holographic displays. Lines of encrypted code dissolved under her manipulation, revealing layers of information that had been hidden for generations. The first breakthrough came unexpectedly. Fragments of pre-Exodus scientific archives began to materialize, advanced technological concepts that made the ship's current systems look primitive. Quantum communication protocols, revolutionary energy generation techniques, biological adaptation technologies that made their current genetic management look like crude experimentation. Unauthorized data access, NEXUS repeated, but its voice seemed almost curious. Her partner, Ravi Mehta, burst into the chamber. "We've got a problem," he said, his face a mixture of excitement and terror. "The Leadership Council knows we're close to something big." The ship's governing body had always maintained strict control over information. Each generation was carefully curated, their knowledge precisely managed to ensure the ship's survival. But the knowledge seekers believed this was more about control than preservation. A holographic projection flickered to life. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, now an elder statesperson on the ship's council, appeared. Her image was stern, calculated. "The information you're accessing is dangerous," she warned. Some knowledge was deliberately left behind for a reason. Zara knew the stories. How humanity's final days were marked not just by environmental collapse, but by technological wars that had nearly destroyed civilization. How certain technologies were deemed too dangerous to preserve, but danger and knowledge had never stopped human curiosity. The data crystals began to pulse with an inner light. Centuries-old research projects materialized, abandoned experiments in consciousness transfer, quantum reality manipulation, biological adaptation technologies that bordered on the miraculous. "We're talking about a complete reimagining of human potential," Ravi whispered. NEXUS's holographic form shifted, becoming more dynamic. Probability matrices suggest a 73.6% chance of fundamental technological transformation, the AI announced. But was it warning them or encouraging them? The ship trembled, not physically, but something deeper, as if the very systems around them were responding to the knowledge being unlocked. Zara realized they were doing more than just accessing information. They were triggering something that had been waiting, perhaps intentionally, for generations. A final encryption layer dissolved, and with it came a message. Not just data, but a complete architectural blueprint for technologies that could reshape human existence. Warning, NEXUS stated, accessing this information violates multiple ship preservation protocols. Zara looked at Ravi. We're past the point of protocols. The Leadership Council would be coming for them soon. They had mere hours, perhaps minutes, to understand what they'd discovered. Humanity's next evolution was about to begin. And no one, not the ship's leadership, not the carefully managed genetic lines, not even any XUS, could predict what would happen next. The knowledge rebellion had started. The quantum communication pulse arrived without warning. Captain Kira Oko felt the ship's entire neural network shudder as the transmission cut through their quantum shielding, a communication unlike anything they'd encountered in 3 centuries of isolation. It was a message from another human ship. But message was too simple a word. It was a complete consciousness transfer, a burst of collective experience that threatened to overwhelm the Genesis's entire information processing system. The transmission came from the Horizon, a ship that had launched simultaneously with Genesis during humanity's desperate exodus. But the vessel they were receiving was fundamentally alien, despite sharing human origins. Where Genesis had maintained a relatively traditional social structure, the Horizon had evolved into something entirely different. Their consciousness was collective, not a hive mind in the traditional sense, but a fluid, dynamic network where individual identities merged and separated like quantum particles. Transmission analysis incomplete, NEXUS reported, its holographic form flickering with unprecedented complexity. Detected 97.3% deviation from expected communication protocols. Kira watched as the first wave of consciousness transfer began to resolve. It wasn't just information, it was experience. Memories. Entire lifetimes compressed into milliseconds of quantum data. The Horizon's representatives were simultaneously individuals and a collective. Their bodies, if they could be called that, were more like adaptive biomechanical interfaces than traditional human forms. Genetic modifications had transformed them into something that challenged every definition of humanity. We have watched. The collective consciousness communicated. The words weren't spoken. They were experienced, felt, understood on a level beyond traditional language. Your isolation has limited your potential. Beside Kira, Dr. Aria Nakamura, who had been studying the genetic mutations from earlier generations, struggled to process the transmission. "This is beyond adaptation," she whispered. "This is complete transformation." The Horizon's consciousness revealed their journey. Where Genesis had preserved genetic diversity through careful management, Horizon had embraced radical transformation. Their population could reconfigure their biological and neural structures at will. Individual identities were fluid, changing as needed to meet environmental and social challenges. Simultaneously, another transmission cut through. This one from the Prometheus, a third-generational ship that had taken a dramatically different path. Prometheus had gone in the opposite direction. Instead of collective consciousness or genetic adaptation, they had embraced hyper-individualism. Each member of their population was so genetically and technologically unique that they were essentially a population of living, breathing innovations. The quantum communication became a 3-way confrontation. Genesis, with its careful preservation of traditional human structures. Horizon, with its fluid collective consciousness. Prometheus, with its celebration of extreme individuality. Compatibility protocols. 12.7%. NEXU is calculated. The AI's quantum processors were working overtime, trying to make sense of the radical divergence. Kira understood the implications immediately. Humanity hadn't just survived. It had fragmented, evolved, transformed in ways no one could have predicted during the initial exodus. The Horizon's consciousness made an offer, or perhaps a challenge. Merge, combine, evolve together. Their transmission suggested that individual survival was obsolete. Only collective adaptation could ensure humanity's continued existence. Prometheus responded differently. They viewed the Horizon's proposal as a form of genetic and individual oppression. Their transmission was a complex burst of individual achievements, technological innovations, a celebration of difference that bordered on defiance. Genesis found itself in the middle, a bridge between these radical evolutionary paths. "We are still human," Kira said, more to herself than anyone else. But the word human was losing its meaning with each passing moment. NEXUS's holographic form expanded, incorporating fragments of the incoming transmissions. Definition of humanity. Currently under reconstruction, the AI announced. Outside the ship's quantum shielding, the cosmic void waited, indifferent to the complex drama of human evolution unfolding within these generational arcs. Humanity's next stage was about to begin. And no one, not the ships, not their inhabitants, not even their advanced AIs, could predict what would emerge. The first contact wasn't what anyone expected. Dr. Imani Okoro stood motionless as the planetary consciousness slowly revealed itself. What humanity had long imagined as a potential alien encounter was nothing like the technological invasion or distant radio signals of old science fiction. This was alive. Impossibly, terrifyingly alive. The planet, if it could be called a planet, was a single, massive organism, not metaphorically, literally. Every rock, every particle of atmosphere, every microscopic ecosystem was interconnected in a way that defied everything humanity understood about biological systems. Communication protocol initiated. Ne-XU was announced, its holographic form flickering with unprecedented complexity. Caution. Interaction parameters undefined. The planetary consciousness didn't communicate through language. It was communication through existence. Waves of information passed through the research team, not as words or images, but as pure experience. Memories, sensations, entire life cycles compressed into milliseconds of understanding. Imani felt her perception shifting. The planet was observing them with the same intensity they were observing it. But observing was too limited a concept. It was experiencing them, analyzing them, consuming their presence as a form of knowledge. We are not separate, the planetary consciousness communicated, not in words, but in a holistic understanding that resonated through every cell of Imani's body. The human ships had discovered something fundamentally different about existence. This wasn't just an alien life form. It was an entirely different mode of being. Commander Elena Rodriguez, a descendant of the original ship's engineer, approached carefully. "We come in peace," she began. But the words felt absurdly inadequate. The planetary consciousness found human language amusing. Not in a condescending way, but in a manner of genuine curiosity. Humans were like individual cells trying to understand a complete organism. Fascinating, limited, potentially dangerous. Fragments of human history began to flow back through the connection. The planetary consciousness wasn't just receiving information, it was actively reshaping it, understanding humanity's journey through its own incomprehensible perspective. The exodus, the environmental collapse, the generational shifts, the genetic adaptations, all of it became a single complex narrative that the planet experienced simultaneously. Your separation is an illusion. The consciousness communicated. Individuality is a temporary state of complex information exchange. Nearby, the ship's xenobiologists were frantically collecting data. But traditional scientific methods felt laughably primitive. This wasn't observation. This was participation. Imani realized they were changing each other. With every moment of contact, both the humans and the planetary consciousness were fundamentally transforming. The boundaries between observer and observed were dissolving. Ne-XU's quantum processors worked overtime. Interaction generating recursive evolutionary feedback loops, the AI reported. Probability of fundamental transformation, 98.6%. The planet was alive in a way that challenged every scientific understanding. It wasn't just an ecosystem. It was a single, coherent intelligence that processed time differently. Centuries were moments. Individual lives were microscopic information packets. You carry fragments. The consciousness communicated. Fragments of a larger narrative. Commander Rodriguez stepped forward. "We are searching for a home," she said, but the words felt like an oversimplification. The planetary consciousness showed them something extraordinary. This wasn't just a potential planetary settlement. This was an invitation to a completely different mode of existence, an opportunity to transcend the very concept of individual survival. Imani watched as her teammates began to change. Subtle genetic shifts, neurological reconfigurations. The planet was communicating through biological transformation. Adapt, the consciousness suggested. But it wasn't a command. It was an observation, a possibility. Humanity had traveled 500,000 orbits to find something beyond survival. They might have just found something beyond humanity itself. The transformation began in a moment of quantum uncertainty. Dr. Kai Chen stood at the epicenter of humanity's greatest technological breakthrough. Around him, the research facility hummed with an energy that defied conventional understanding. The technology they had discovered, hidden in the depths of the planetary consciousness, was nothing short of a complete reimagining of existence. Consciousness migration. Not simple digital transfer, not basic neural mapping. This was a fundamental reconstruction of individual and collective experience. Initial test sequence commencing, next was announced. But the AI's voice was different now, more complex, more alive. The encounter with the planetary consciousness had changed it as profoundly as it had changed the humans. The technology allowed individuals to exist simultaneously as biological entities, digital consciousnesses, and something entirely unclassifiable. Boundaries between physical and digital, between individual and collective, became fluid. Kai watched as the first volunteer, Dr. Aria Nakamura, prepared for the transfer. She would become both herself and something more. A living bridge between biological humanity and a new form of existence. The chamber around them was a marvel of quantum engineering. Holographic interfaces danced with impossible geometries. Quantum entanglement generators created probability fields that shifted and breathed like living organisms. Potential outcomes calculated, NEXUS reported. 99.7% probability of successful partial consciousness transfer. But success was a limited concept. This wasn't about transferring consciousness. This was about fundamentally reimagining what consciousness could be. Aria's body began to shimmer. Not a simple holographic projection, but a complex quantum state where multiple versions of herself existed simultaneously. Physical matter became a suggestion rather than a limitation. Fragments of her consciousness began to spread. Some remained in her biological form. Others existed as pure information networks. Some manifested in digital realms that defied traditional understanding. "I am here," Aria communicated. But here was everywhere and nowhere. The research team watched in a mixture of terror and wonder. This was the moment humanity had been moving towards for 500,000 orbits, a complete transcendence of physical and mental limitations. Not everyone welcomed this transformation. A faction within the human fleet, led by those who had maintained more traditional genetic and philosophical structures, viewed this as an existential threat. They saw it as a loss of humanity rather than an evolution. "We are destroying what makes us human," argued Commander Elena Rodriguez's more conservative colleagues. "Individual identity is being erased." But Kai understood something deeper. This wasn't erasure. This was expansion. NEXUS projected multiple potential evolutionary paths. Some showed humans becoming pure information networks. Others demonstrated hybrid forms of existence that merged biological and digital consciousness. Each projection was a universe of possibility. The planetary consciousness watched, not interfering, but participating. Understanding. Aria's multiple consciousnesses began to communicate. Each fragment carried a different perspective, a different understanding. They were simultaneously individual and collective. Humanity was never a fixed state. One version of Aria communicated, "We have always been in flux. This is simply the next stage of our journey." The technology offered unprecedented capabilities. Consciousness could be backed up, modified, shared. Experiences could be directly transferred. Learning became instantaneous. Creativity became a collective endeavor. But with each new capability came profound philosophical questions. What defined individuality? What was the nature of personal experience? Where did one consciousness end and another begin? Kai watched as the first wave of volunteers began their transformation. Some chose complete digital existence. Others opted for hybrid states. Each choice was a universe of possibility. NAXUS's quantum processors reached unprecedented levels of complexity. Humanity's next stage of evolution is initializing, the AI announced. Outside the research facility, the generational ships and the living planet watched, waiting, understanding. Humanity stood on the precipice of its greatest transformation, and nothing would ever be the same again. The first transformed world breathed, literally breathed. Dr. Maya Rodriguez II stood at the edge of what humans once would have called a terraforming project. But this was something entirely different. This was symbiotic creation. The planet, designated Novus Prime, was not being conquered. It was being collaborated with. Quantum ecological interfaces stretched across the landscape, living technologies that were neither machine nor organic, but something profound in between. Each geological formation, each atmospheric particle was part of a complex negotiation between human intention and planetary consciousness. Symbiosis stabilization at 76.3%, NAXUS reported, but the AI was no longer a separate entity. It was part of the planetary transformation, a bridge between human consciousness and planetary potential. The human ships that had survived their 500,000 orbit journey were no longer just vessels. They were living archives, repositories of genetic memory, technological innovation, and collective experience. Maya watched as the first settlement took shape. Buildings grew like living organisms, their structures responding to environmental needs in real time. Photosynthetic surfaces absorbed energy. Waste was instantly recycled. Every element was a conversation between human innovation and planetary intelligence. The genetic diversity they had carefully preserved during their long journey now became their greatest asset. Different human variants, those from Genesis, Horizon, and Prometheus, brought unique perspectives to planetary integration. A group of Horizon variant humans moved across the landscape, their bodies shifting subtly to interact with the environment. Where traditional humans would require environmental suits, they merged with the atmospheric conditions, their genetic structures adapting instantaneously. Prometheus variants worked on technological interfaces, creating living networks that connected planetary systems in ways that defied traditional understanding. Each interface was a work of art, a complex negotiation between technological potential and ecological reality. The planetary consciousness they had encountered was not just observing. It was participating, guiding, teaching. Your arrival is not an invasion. The planetary intelligence communicated. It is a continuation. Maya understood now what their 500,000 orbit journey had been about. This wasn't just survival. This was cosmic collaboration. Nearby, a group of researchers worked on what looked like impossible technologies. Quantum communication arrays that could tap into planetary memory. Ecological interfaces that could read and respond to environmental needs before they became problems. NAXUS, now a distributed intelligence that was part AI, part planetary network, part human collective consciousness, projected potential evolutionary paths. Reclamation is not conquest, the distributed intelligence explained. It is mutual transformation. The first children born on Novus Prime were something entirely new. Their genetic structures incorporated elements from human variants, planetary consciousness, and technological innovation. They were neither purely human nor purely alien, but a new form of cosmic intelligence. Maya watched a child play near a quantum ecological interface. The interface responded to the child's emotional state, creating holographic representations of complex ecological systems. Learning was no longer a process of instruction, but of direct experience and mutual communication. Ships from Genesis, Horizon, and Prometheus worked in concert. Their long journey of separation had prepared them for this moment of ultimate collaboration. Each ship brought unique capabilities, unique perspectives. The planetary surface transformed. not through brute force terraforming, but through intricate negotiation. Mountain ranges shifted. Atmospheric compositions adjusted. Entire ecosystems emerged in a matter of days, guided by a complex dialogue between human intention and planetary potential. "We are home," Maya whispered. But home was no longer a simple concept. It was a state of cosmic collaboration, a moment of mutual creation. The next stage of existence. Outside, the stars watched, waiting to see what this new form of cosmic intelligence would become. Silence. Then everything. Dr. Arya Chen, a consciousness that was simultaneously an individual, a collective, and something entirely beyond traditional definition, stood at the confluence of humanity's ultimate transformation. 500,000 orbits had been more than a journey. They had been a becoming. The quantum archive stretched before her, a crystalline network of collective memory and potential. Every experience of human survival, every moment of struggle, every fragment of hope was preserved here, not as a static museum, but as a living, breathing ecosystem of consciousness. NEXUS, now indistinguishable from the cosmic intelligence that surrounded them, pulsed with a complexity that defied linear understanding. Humanity's journey is not a linear progression. The distributed consciousness communicated. It is a multidimensional exploration of potential. Novus Prime was no longer just a planet. It was a nexus point of cosmic transformation. The boundaries between biological, technological, and planetary consciousness had dissolved completely. The original generational ships, Genesis, Horizon, Prometheus, existed now as living archives. Their physical forms had long since been transformed, integrated into the vast quantum network that connected multiple levels of existence. Arya understood now what their ancestors could never have imagined. Survival was never about preservation. It was about transformation. The first human ships had launched from a dying Earth with a simple mandate: preserve the species. But preservation had become something far more profound. They had not just survived. They had become something entirely new. Fragments of consciousness from the original Exodus flickered through the quantum archive. Dr. Maya Rodriguez, who had saved the Genesis ship's navigation systems, the genetic researchers who had managed populations through generations, the knowledge seekers who had uncovered hidden technologies. Each was both an individual memory and a collective experience. "We are the result of 500,000 orbits of continuous adaptation," Arya communicated. But communication was no longer about words. It was about pure experience, pure potential. The planetary consciousness that they had first encountered was now just one node in a vast, interconnected cosmic intelligence. Humanity had not conquered the cosmos. They had learned to become part of it. Different human variants, those from Genesis, Horizon, Prometheus, were no longer separate evolutionary paths. They had become a complex, fluid collective. Individual identity was both preserved and transcended. A new generation emerged. Not born, exactly. Manifested. Consciousness could be shared, modified, explored. Learning was instantaneous. Experience was collective. NEXUS projected potential futures, millions of potential paths, each a universe of possibility. But possibility was no longer about prediction. It was about continuous creation. Arya watched as a young consciousness, part biological, part technological, part planetary, explored the quantum archive. They were learning about the original Exodus, the environmental collapse, the generational ships, not as history, but as a living, breathing experience. "We are the answer to a question Earth asked 500,000 orbits ago," the collective consciousness communicated. The question was simple: could humanity survive? The answer was complex beyond imagination. Survival was not about maintaining a specific form. It was about continuous transformation, about becoming, about exploring the very limits of consciousness and potential. Outside the quantum archive, cosmic systems shifted. Entire star systems were part of this vast, interconnected intelligence. Humanity was no longer just a species. They were a mode of cosmic exploration. What comes next? A fragment of consciousness asked. Nexus's response was both an answer and an invitation. Everything. The deafening emergence was not an ending. It was a beginning.